Hello, friends, comrades, and interested others. Today is Friday, and the topic of today's video will be demystifying Antifa. I was actually planning on doing a similar video topic that I was planning on saving for later on in this video series. Given what happened in Charlottesville and the direction that media and public opinion seems to be taking since then, I thought that this was a more appropriate time to be discussing this topic. A word on Charlottesville. I would like to offer my deepest condolences to the family, friends, loved ones, and comrades of Heather Heyer. I would also like to offer my support and condolences to everyone who was injured in that protest, and the family, friends, loved ones, and comrades of everyone who's been affected, and also just to speak out in support of the amazing anti-fascist and anarchist organizing that is happening there, as well as across the US and across the world in solidarity with the events in Charlottesville. I think that the work that everyone is doing in your communities is incredibly valuable and important, and with that just being said, I would like to move forward. So my video for this week is actually completely unscripted because I wanted to be able to speak frankly and off the cuff about my own feelings, experiences, and thoughts about Antifa or anti-fascism. There are a lot of misconceptions going through the media right now about what exactly Antifa is, and I will refer to it as Antifa throughout this video just because I feel like that term has somehow taken on a meaning that is more infamous than the term anti-fascism, although it's important to specify that the term Antifa literally is just short for anti-fascist. That's all it means. There is a lot of misconception that Antifa is an organization. Antifa is not an organization. Antifa is a political tendency. So many articles you will see referring to people as members of Antifa. One cannot be a member of Antifa any more than one can be a member of libertarianism, or a member of liberalism, or a member of conservatism. Anti-fascism and Antifa is a political tendency that one believes in and practices. It's not an organization. There are anti-fascist organizations the same way that there are libertarian organizations, and there are conservative organizations, and there are other political organizations. So you can be someone who is an anti-fascist, who's a member of an anti-fascist organization, but simply by being an anti-fascist or an Antifa, that does not make you a member of Antifa, because you're not. There is no broader anti-fascist organization. There just isn't. There is definitely networking that happens between different anti-fascist organizations, but even many cities will have multiple anti-fascist organizations that are potentially completely unrelated to each other. So the idea that there is some anti-fascist cabal, and that we're all being paid by George Soros, yeah, that's not. I mean, I wish I was being paid by George Soros. I wait for that check in the mail every day, but unfortunately, we're not. Anti-fascism is not sponsored by anyone. So if anti-fascism is a political tendency, then what are the specific political beliefs and alignments of people who consider themselves to be Antifa? So there actually is no concise political opinion for people who are anti-fascist or consider themselves to be Antifa. Literally all it means is anti-fascist, against fascism. So you can be of any political opinion pretty much that doesn't get along with fascism, which should be mostly everyone, hopefully. If you consider your opinions and beliefs to be in opposition to fascism, then you are an anti-fascist. It's not a lot more complicated than that. That being said, there are political tendencies and political beliefs that are more common within anti-fascist movements. There's definitely a big correlation between anti-fascism and anarchism. Anti-fascism has been an important part of anarchist community organizing, going all the way back to the inception of fascism, which of course comes from Mussolini's Italy. So since Italy was the birthplace of fascism, it also served as the birthplace of anti-fascism. I believe there is a phrase, wherever fascism arises, anti-fascism will rise up to vanquish it, or something like that. So any situation or environment where fascism is cropping up will inspire similar anti-fascist movements as a counter to that. However, anti-fascism is definitely not a political movement that is restricted to anarchism. There is a lot of also Marxist and Maoist and even like social democrats and a few liberals who consider themselves to be anti-fascist and participate in anti-fascist organizing. It is a movement that I personally perceive to be centered largely on the libertarian left, which makes a lot of sense when you consider what the polar opposite of fascism would be, given that fascism is authoritarian, nationalistic, hierarchical, supremacist, and all of those other things. The political ideology that is the most opposed to all of those things is libertarian socialism or anarchism. So it would make sense that the most adamant opposition to that political tendency is coming out of the far left and the libertarian left. So who are the Antifa, though? Political tendencies aside, like what kind of person gets involved in that kind of organizing? And what kind of people could you expect to see were you to go out to an anti-fascist demonstration or protest? So it's important to understand that anti-fascists are pretty invariably members of your own community. I've noticed even throughout my own participation in organizing in Toronto, a lot of the fascists and otherwise like far right-wing groups will be shipping members in from other cities and even sometimes from across country to try to build numbers and create the appearance that they have a large local presence when they actually don't. I remember at many of the rallies, the white supremacist anti-Muslim rallies that happened in Nathan Phillips Square, there were Soldiers of Odin and JDL and people like that brought in from Montreal, Brampton, and other cities. Which, I mean, anyone who is living in a community that is currently experiencing a rise in white supremacist or neo-fascist organizing, which unfortunately seems to be most places in North America and Europe, should be outraged at that the fact that there are kind of outsiders like coming into your community to scare people and intimidate people and make people feel unsafe who are actually members of your community. Anti-fascism doesn't do that. If there's an anti-fascist organization or an anti-fascist presence in your city, you can bet that they live there. Just speaking from my own personal experience and the anti-fascist organizers that I interact with, anti-fascists are kitchen workers, they are laborers, they are single mothers, they are artists, they are students, they are journalists, they are grocery workers, they are activists, like they are just people. Like that's pretty much the only, like there's no broader trend or broader conspiracy. Like people from all sorts of different work backgrounds, people from all sorts of different like socioeconomic positions. Most people who involved in anti-fascist organizing in my experience are marginalized people themselves. Anti-fascists are Muslims, anti-fascists are racialized people, women, transgender people, disabled people, working class people, poor people, sex workers. Anti-fascists are people who live in your local neighborhood, who are being the most affected by this organizing and who have like taken this like actually kind of valiant stance towards community defense. So it's important to understand that that is the place that most of these people are coming from when you talk about and are trying to understand like what anti-fascism is, what its goals are, what it's doing, and forming an opinion on it. So what do anti-fascists do? Anti-fascism is a political tendency. It tends to come with a few key phrases. For example, no platforming and we go where they go. So no platforming, which I already discussed in a previous video, which I will link in the description, is the practice of removing venues and preventing fascists and people with overtly bigoted opinions from accessing venues with which to promote and propagandize their political agenda. The reason why they do that, again, as I discussed in the video, and I will also post more links on no platforming because I know that that's something that the internet loves to argue about. The point of no platforming is the idea that Nazis and white supremacists and fascists and crypto-fascists and people whose views and beliefs are in alignment with hatred and bigotry in some way do not participate in dialogue in good faith. The purpose of their participation in public discourse is for the ability to propagandize their beliefs and to create a sense of false equivalency between views that are bigoted and hateful and views that are otherwise legitimate by having their views hosted by legitimate platforms, often manipulating language of freedom of speech to have access to those spaces. So the goal of anti-fascism is to deplatform fascists completely in every sense, not only by disrupting events, but also by not allowing them spots on TV, by having their internet platforms removed, by depriving them of sources of income, such as having their Patreons and PayPal accounts taken down, and basically just trying to prevent these people from organizing in any way possible. The goal of anti-fascism is also to provide a sense of community safety and solidarity, especially with marginalized and vulnerable members of that community. So anti-fascists will also often do postering, street art, and propaganda to try to establish a visible anti-fascist and inclusive presence. They may do street patrols. They may be involved in like other community supports such as food programs, book clubs, other things to kind of like provide community and resources to people. So in the truest sense, anti-fascists are primarily community organizers and community safety volunteers, kind of. Now, the question that inevitably has to be answered is, what about the violence? What about the equivalency? Isn't punching a Nazi in the face just as bad as being a Nazi yourself? No, it's not. So it is important to highlight once again that the function of Antifa is primarily a defensive one. This means community defense, defending people in your area against real, tangible threats of annihilation that are being promoted by neo-fascists, white supremacists, neo-Nazis, and other dangerous far-right groups. Antifa do not discriminate against any individual group of people. They have no agenda against any individual group of people. They do not hate like white men. Many of them are white men. There is no exclusivity. It is an extremely diverse group of people from all sorts of different racial, gender, and class backgrounds. They are not a hate group. They are not targeting anyone except Nazis. And if you genuinely believe that fighting Nazis is just as bad as being a Nazi, then I encourage you to have that conversation with any World War II veteran. Actually, please don't bother those poor people. Just educate yourself and develop some historical and social awareness and get on the right side of history. Fascism has never been defeated in debate. Fascists and neo-Nazis and even original Nazis have been quite open that their agenda in participating in public discourse is not to have a civil debate. It is to propagandize and recruit people, and they take advantage of liberal rhetoric such as like tolerance and freedom of speech and things like that to insert themselves into a group or into a space, recruit people, and then develop power that they can then use to commit violence against, kill, or imprison the people whose kindness they took advantage of for that platform in the first place. And there's massive historical precedent for that. Fascists have only ever been defeated by force. Hitler himself was quoted as saying that the only way their movement could have been defeated is if people had realized what their real goals were early on and had smashed the nucleus of their movement with the utmost brutality. Which is honestly probably the only valuable piece of information that Hitler ever provided us with. So that is exactly what people are going to try to do. It is important to realize that it is not just physical violence that is violence. The incitement of violence is also a form of violence. So when you see someone giving a Nazi salute or something like that and then getting punched and you're like, oh, well, he was just standing there. No. He was promoting genocide. If you are flying a Nazi flag, if you are even flying a Confederate flag, if you are signaling or dog whistling or using neo-fascist or crypto-fascist symbols, you are associating yourself with a movement, you are promoting a movement that promotes genocide. And that is a form of ideological and cultural violence against marginalized communities that tangibly results in physical violence, as it has in the past and as it is right now. So it's important to recognize that while many anti-fascists may engage in violence, that violence is defensive and targeted towards people presenting tangible threats to vulnerable people in their communities. They are not inciting violence or going out of their way to hurt people, especially not like innocent people. The violence is very strictly towards people who are presenting tangible threats of violence and oppression. So that is not equivalent to wanting to genocide entire groups of people. I hope that we can agree on that. But you know, anti-fascists don't just target real fascists and real neo-Nazis. They target like a bunch of different people. They target transphobes and homophobes and misogynists and anti-SJWs, and it seems like they're just targeting any group of people that doesn't agree with them. I guarantee you that anti-fascists probably understand fascism better than you do. Given that it's kind of their whole thing. So while you might not understand the similarities between a literal neo-Nazi, like white hood, white supremacist, and like a militant transphobe or someone promoting some other specific bigoted opinion, then that is kind of a point of research that you might need to do, but there is definitely like they are related issues. Fascists are, for the large part, not just people who call themselves fascists. In fact, most of them are people who do not call themselves fascists. So whether someone identifies as a fascist or not does not really matter if what they're doing is benefiting fascism, collaborating with fascism, sympathizing with fascism, or even if they are decrying fascism, continuing to do things that further the aims of fascism. Given that fascism is misogynistic, transphobic, racist, anti-Semitic, ableist, eugenicist, and all of these other things, any form of oppression against those marginalized groups is furthering the aims of fascism. Therefore, anti-fascism has to be an anti-oppressive, intersectional, and multi-issue political movement. And honestly, a lot of the people that you think are maybe just, you know, a normal conservative or a normal right-winger who's being unjustly targeted because they're not a real fascist, honestly, a lot of hardline conservatives are crypto-fascists. A lot of them will say dog whistly things that are like code words for fascism. They'll call themselves paleo-conservatives or I've even met a few fascists who identify as classical liberals. Like, they use this language that means one thing to a moderate or conservative or liberal listener and means another thing to other fascists and people who have educated themselves to recognize fascist dog whistles. I mean, Jordan Peterson himself, the person that I am most criticized for opposing because apparently he's not a real fascist, has been called a Nazi philosopher by one of Canada's leading white supremacists. So just because the average person might not be able to make those connections between random bigot and actual fascist does not necessarily mean that those connections aren't there. Given that fascism is a political and social disease that infects failing capitalist democracies, it also makes sense that the anti-fascist movement is largely anti-capitalist. So many anti-fascists will also engage in property damage. It is important to draw a distinction between property damage and violence. Property damage is not a form of violence because it does not hurt anyone. For example, smashing a bank window, property damage, not violence. And especially if the property that you're damaging belongs to a people or a corporation who only has access to that capital via the exploitation of labor, that is definitely like a form of punching up. It's not violent, it's not oppressive, if anything, it is an act of retaliation. Some of the property damage that's committed by anti-fascists in more volatile areas is for the purpose of removing like exploitative businesses from an area or in attempts to create a kind of autonomous community zone. Police are another oppressive and violent group that tends to promote the agendas of corporate supremacy and white supremacy and protects the interests of capitalism and also disproportionately targets marginalized people for violence. So it makes sense, again, that the anti-fascist movement is largely anti-police. Again, no equivalency between police brutality and violence on a marginalized or disempowered community or person, and attempts by members of that community to take actions to protect themselves. It's important to contextualize that while violence and property damage are things that are engaged in by some members of the anti-fascist movement, that those acts of violence and property damage are very specifically targeted defensive actions that, while they may be militant or jarring, are not amoral and are not done thoughtlessly or for the purpose of creating terror or violence. Some people will falsely assert that Antifa or anti-fascism is a terrorist group or a terrorist movement. It is definitionally not. I believe the Anti-Defamation League has spoken out against that, but I will find resources about that to link to in the description. Antifa is definitely not a terrorist movement. So terrorism is when someone commits acts of violence for the purpose of inciting terror. When white supremacists burn a cross on someone's front lawn, that is terrorism. They are doing it to induce terror. The purpose of anti-fascism is not to induce terror, although that might sometimes be a byproduct, hopefully being experienced by fascists. The purpose of anti-fascism is, again, community defense. It is a reactive thing. It is a defensive and responsive thing. They have no targeted group. They are not a hate group. They have no discrimination or agenda against any group of people based on an immutable characteristic. The only group of people that they oppose is fascism, and being a fascist is not an immutable characteristic. It is a terrible life choice that people have made. So where is anti-fascism going from here? I honestly wish that I had more thoughts on that, but I feel like I'm kind of almost sitting back waiting to see how the public perception develops, because ever since Charlottesville, I've seen so many articles talking about Antifa, even in a way that isn't bad, like even in a way that is offering some sort of like solidarity or some sort of like fair perspective from the anti-fascist viewpoint. And I'm very interested to see that, and I'm very interested to see how that will play out moving forward, and how public opinion of militant anti-fascist action will evolve moving forward. So I think that we're all just kind of waiting to see how this political situation continues to develop over like both in the near future and over the course of the next several years. But one thing is for sure is that the anti-fascist movement is definitely going strong and growing. More people are joining anti-fascist organizations and getting involved in anti-fascist organizing. More people come out to protests. More people are really understanding their own personal responsibility, especially in the wake of the severe incompetence of the government and the police to deal with this. Especially since many members of the police are themselves fascist, and I feel like I hear about another police officer every week who's been outed as like a member of the KKK or the Proud Boys or some other organization. It makes total sense why the police have not been helpful in addressing this at all. My hopes for the anti-fascist movement is that it inspires people to take a more critical view of the government, take a more critical view about kind of how the justice system works, how community accountability and justice are performed, and understanding that basically the government and the police are not going to save us from this. And if anything, like this opposition to the current rise of neo-fascism is going to be an extremely grassroots and extremely community-based and ground-up endeavor. So how does one get involved in anti-fascist activism? Well, if you're watching this video and anti-fascism is something that you're interested in, then you've already taken a good first step to educating yourself about what this movement is about. If you're living in a metropolitan area, it is likely that there are anti-fascist organizations or groups in your area, and I encourage you to reach out to them to find out how you can get involved. If there is no anti-fascist organization in your area, I still encourage you to go out to any local demonstrations or protests. And there's also actions that can be taken by you as an individual. This includes stuff that you can even do on the internet by doing research, writing articles, and kind of like promoting anti-fascism online. There's also important like artwork to be done. Like you can make videos, you can make art, you can make posters, you can make propaganda. There's lots of work to be done in like resource creation and stuff like that. You can go around postering your local neighborhood, putting up signs that say like anti-fascist zone and stuff like that. Although I encourage you that if you're doing posters to go with a friend or a group of people with whom you feel safe. I encourage you to have conversations with your friends, have conversations with your family, your co-workers, your classmates about anti-fascism. Educate yourselves about the points, like educate yourselves about the necessity of militant action, educate yourself about why pacifism is not an effective response to fascism, and become familiar with these talking points and arguments so that you can have important conversations with people to make them understand anti-fascist organizing and why that's important to have in our communities. It's really not all about Nazi punching. There's lots of supportive work to be done, even at demonstrations. There's various roles to be filled, whether you are just an attendant or marshalling or performing street medic duties or providing food. Like there's lots of different roles within anti-fascist organizing for people of different abilities, different engagement levels, and different skills. So don't think that, if you're not physically up for like going and actually like engaging in some sort of like direct action, that there's no place for you, because that is probably like less than 1% of the organizing is actual like direct action, and the rest of it is like support work and community outreach and other stuff. So there's lots of work to be done. And don't be dissuaded by the amount of exaggerated and hyperbolic and like shocking media attention that anti-fascism gets, because I assure you that most of the organizing is a lot chiller than that. So yeah, I hope this video was informative and engaging. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, if you'd like to have a conversation, the comment section is always open. I will include some citations and further reading in the description of this video. I would also like to add quickly that I do have a Patreon now at patreon.com/circleatattoo. So if you have extra money and would like to throw it my way to help fund creating these videos, I would really appreciate that. However, there is absolutely no obligation to contribute, especially for those without those financial resources. Obviously, information wants to be free, and I will continue making these videos funded or not. Thanks so much for watching, and I will see you next time. Peace out.